I remember the exact moment I realized my family didn't see me, not really. It wasn't a revelation that hit like lightning. It was slow, quiet, insidious, a feeling that had been building for years until it finally made itself visible in the most brutal way possible. A single text message. "We can't do this anymore. You need to move out. It's time." No warning, no conversation, just a sentence that erased decades of effort, care, and silent sacrifice. I sat on my worn basement couch, the fluorescent glow of my laptop reflecting off the walls, and read it again, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't. The words were there, bold and final, like a verdict handed down in absentia. I've always been the one who fixes things, the invisible one. Growing up, it was subtle at first. Homework for my sister, school projects completed late into the night, extra chores so everyone else could play. I didn't complain. Complaining wasn't part of the invisible child's vocabulary. Gratitude was optional, but compliance was mandatory. I learned early that my worth wasn't in recognition, it was in service. By the time I turned 25, that service had evolved. I wasn't just helping with homework anymore. I was silently financing lives. My father, Frank, and my mother, Susan, had fallen behind on their mortgage, drowning in debt. I lived in a tiny, dimly lit apartment, surviving on instant noodles and late-night shifts at a bookstore. And yet, when the phone rang that night, I picked it up. "Leah," my father's voice trembled. Panic, a sound I had rarely heard from him. "The bank, they're talking foreclosure. We're 6 payments behind." "Please?" I asked the obvious question. "How much?" "Everything," he said. "Taxes, bills, the mortgage, all of it. We're drowning, Leah. You have to help." It should have been a moment of clarity, a boundary I could have enforced. But it wasn't. I paid. I paid the back taxes, then took over the monthly mortgage of $2,200. I convinced myself it was for the house, the only home I'd ever known. That rationalization lasted 6 months before my mother called with the next crisis. "Leah, honey," Susan's voice cracked, a performance of sorrow she had perfected over the years. "Olivia got into private university. She deserves it. But tuition, it's $18,000 a year. We can't." And of course I paid. I had no choice. Over the next 3 years, I funded her tuition entirely, over $70,000 in payments, all while my own life shrank around me. Skipped meals. Ignored car repairs. Missed birthdays. Every small achievement I made was met with a dismissive "that's nice," while the golden child, Olivia, was celebrated for the smallest victories. This was the invisible chain of survival, the quiet prison of compliance. I was the scapegoat, the one meant to absorb failures and finance appearances, while the family projected an image of perfection. And I was complicit, silently believing one day they'd recognize my sacrifice. One day they'd say, "Thank you. We see you." But that day never came. Fast forward 4 years. The text that kicked me out wasn't an outburst. It wasn't anger. It was the inevitable result of decades of exploitation. And that morning, as I slept in my apartment, I didn't wake to an alarm but to the vibrating hornet of my phone. Missed calls, frantic messages, a cascade of panic because the mortgage I had been secretly funding was suddenly canceled. "Leah, what have you done? The power is off. Call us immediately. Frank is furious." I didn't respond. Not yet. I opened my laptop, started my work, and watched as the consequences of their neglect and my compliance began to unravel. It was in that silence that I realized the truth. I wasn't being punished for anger. I was being liberated. 4 years of invisible labor had finally reached the point of accountability. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was performing a long overdue audit. But the real turning point came hours later, when I saw the public Facebook post. Frank had framed himself as the victim, portraying me as selfish and ungrateful. The post was filled with performative sorrow and subtle accusations, an attempt to manipulate perception. But instead of fury, I felt ice. Every ember of doubt I'd harbored about my actions vanished. I called my lawyer, Julia, immediately. The conversation was precise, measured. "I want the mortgage canceled," I told her. "And every dollar I've spent funding this family accounted for. We're going to send a formal demand for repayment." Julia's tone remained professional, but there was a spark of admiration. "It's messy, Leah, but it's solid. You have the documentation, the bank transfers, the evidence. This will hold. Evidence. That was all I needed. I wasn't angry. I was surgical. Every payment, every cent, every hour of labor logged and ready. The invisible chains would be replaced by an unassailable ledger. A record of truth. The next few days were quiet but heavy. My family received the demand letter. They didn't call. They didn't respond. And in that quiet I felt the first taste of liberation. The scales finally were tilting back toward balance. It was then that Julia called again, her voice shifting from professional to conspiratorial. Leah, there's something else. Your grandmother left you a provision in her will. $50,000, separate from any other inheritance. But Frank, he forged your signature to claim it. The check is in his account. I sat in silence. $50,000. Stolen. My life's labor compounded by deceit, compounded again. And in that moment something inside me changed. I wasn't just balancing the books anymore. I was building a case, constructing an unstoppable force of accountability. This wasn't revenge, it was justice, meticulously calculated and unavoidable. The letters, the legal maneuvers, the discovery of fraud, they all became instruments of equilibrium. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply orchestrated a system in which my family could no longer ignore reality. And so, the first chapter of the reckoning ended. I was no longer the invisible child. I was the executor of justice, the one who finally wielded the quiet, terrifying power that had been lying dormant in my patience, my compliance, and my invisibility. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Comment below if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. And if you're enjoying this story, give it a like, it really helps the channel. The days after the letters arrived were quiet, too quiet. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like a storm hovering on the horizon, each moment charged with anticipation. I could feel it, the subtle trembling of a house built on deceit finally beginning to crack. Every text I ignored, every email left unopened, was a deliberate choice. I had learned that chaos didn't need to be loud. It could be methodical, almost imperceptible, and far more devastating when it landed. Brooke's social media posts became a theater of desperation. Every story, every caption, every meticulously staged photo was a desperate attempt to reclaim a narrative she had always assumed was hers to control. Her followers, unaware of the ledger that existed behind closed doors, sent sympathy in waves. Laura is cruel. How could she do this to her family? She's heartless. But sympathy, even when misdirected, was inconsequential. I didn't react publicly. My weapon wasn't outrage or drama. It was fact, law, and evidence meticulously compiled over 4 years. Trevor, my partner and legal ally, understood this instinctively. He wasn't just supportive, he was strategic, his mind always several moves ahead. Together we reviewed the estate file line by line, cross-referencing bank statements, tuition payments, mortgage transfers, every detail that proved the invisible labor I had provided, and every act of betrayal committed against me. I remember pointing at the screen, voice calm but precise. Look at this, Trevor. The will stipulates Brooke gets a cash inheritance of $50,000 separate from the house. Teresa's letter establishes an $80,000 debt she owed. Do the math. Trevor nodded, the slow grin forming on his face, chillingly satisfied. She doesn't just get nothing, she owes $30,000. The estate is owed $30,000. Legally, she is indebted. That realization, that simple accounting, was more powerful than any confrontation. The family's armor, built over decades of manipulation, began to crumble. Every text Brooke sent demanding proof, every frantic call from my mother, was ignored. The silence was deafening, and it was mine. The demand letter we sent, drafted with precision on official firm letterhead and delivered by courier to both Brooke and my mother, was a declaration of absolute authority. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't negotiable. $30,000. 30 days to respond. Assets subject to lien if ignored. No room for spin, no room for manipulation, no room for social media theatrics. And they didn't respond. It was Thursday when the first real escalation arrived, my mother storming into my office unannounced, wild-eyed, hair disheveled, pleading, screaming, demanding that I fix the humiliation I had caused. Every word, every gesture, was a textbook attempt to guilt me back into the role I had shed. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply observed. The panic, the desperation, the performance, it was all meaningless. "You're tearing this family apart over money," she shrieked. "I was surgical. You tore it apart years ago. Every time you designated one child as a prop and the other as a bank to exploit. I'm just the first to deliver the bill." Her face crumbled. Guilt, panic, manipulation, it all fell away, leaving raw desperation. "What do you want, Laura?" she whispered. "Do you want us to beg?" I walked slowly to my office door. "I want you to leave," I said. 60 seconds or security escorts you." And she left, heel clicks echoing down the hallway, the sound of control slipping from her grasp. The fallout was swift and methodical. Brooke, unable to cover the $30,000 debt, was forced to liquidate assets she had assumed were hers for life. Her car, her savings, her condo, all touched by legal intervention. The illusion of her curated life collapsed. The Instagram stories, the influencer persona, the performance of grief, all meaningless in the face of immutable facts. Even Frank, my father, attempted his performative outrage on social media, but his posts, once powerful, fell flat. He lacked the leverage he had once held. Every transaction, every bank record, every notarized letter from Aunt Teresa was an unassailable truth. The narrative they had tried to control for decades was unraveling in silence, and I didn't need to shout, it screamed for me. And in the midst of this chaos, I finally found closure. The house, the property that had been the centerpiece of decades of invisible labor, was officially transferred into my name. Free and clear. No dramatics, no fanfare. Just quiet, earned, and irreplaceable. The first night Trevor and I stayed there, we didn't bring furniture. We didn't need it. We opened a bottle of wine, poured it into 2 glasses, and sat on the hardwood floor, breathing in the old wood and dust. It wasn't a victory. It was a reckoning, the silent fulfillment of justice meticulously calculated. Weeks later, I found a photo album in the attic, forgotten, buried beneath years of manufactured perfection. Among the staged family photos, one small faded image caught my eye. Aunt Teresa and me at a county fair, 9 years old, holding a ribbon for a pie I had baked. She was smiling, not the performance, not the obligation, but a real genuine smile. I placed it on the mantel above the fireplace. A single reminder of truth and recognition in a lifetime of exploitation. In that quiet, reflective moment I understood. The invisible chains had been broken. The ledger balanced. The scales tipped, not by emotion, but by the undeniable weight of justice, facts, and unflinching persistence. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Comment below if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours. And if you're enjoying this story, give it a like. It really helps the channel. The weeks following the delivery of the demand letter were strange. Quiet, almost unreal. The storm of social media posts, frantic texts, and desperate phone calls had begun to fade, replaced by the slow, inevitable creep of consequences. Brooke had no way to dodge what was coming. My mother's frantic attempts to spin the narrative, to guilt me into compliance, dwindled into muted silence. I spent those days in the house alone at first, wandering from room to room, feeling the weight of decades of invisible labor settle into tangible space. Every corner whispered memories of my childhood, the sacrifices, the tutoring nights, the unpaid bills, the silent support that had gone unnoticed. And for the first time, the house felt like mine, not as a gift but as recognition, as justice. Trevor and I had coordinated with his law firm to monitor Brooke's responses and financial moves. She had only 30 days to respond to the repayment notice, or the lien would be enforced. Predictably, she tried to negotiate at the last minute, claiming confusion, claiming misinterpretation. Trevor, calm and precise, reminded her of the legal standing. No negotiations. The debt is due. The estate is owed $30,000. Assets are subject to lien. Period. It was a quiet form of vengeance, surgical and unrelenting. No shouting. No confrontation. Just undeniable, unavoidable consequences. Brooke's lifestyle began to unravel immediately. Her condo, her car, her bank accounts, anything she had taken for granted, was now within reach of the estate. The Instagram stories stopped. The carefully curated online persona faltered. For the first time, Brooke had to confront the reality that her life had been funded, supported, and enabled by deception, mismanagement, and my silent sacrifices. She wasn't a golden child anymore.